We have Terrence Gangster Williams, the half-brother of Birdman, who just got out of prison after serving a lot of time. In the state, you confessed to killing how many people?
40.
What? You confessed to killing 40 people in the state?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And as Janet Reno talked about crime in our country, more strikes the streets of New Orleans. This time, it was a robbery that ended in murder.
Got hit up with an AK, all in my back, bullet wounds, letting you know. It's real down here. It's real. It's like this. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? The 4-4. And a youngster robbed me, trying to get a fix. You know, shot me 6 times, like I said earlier. You know.
Flip that W over, make it an M. We in that Magnolia, put it down, third one. You heard? I got him right here. Originally, you know him. There's Magnolia Slim. You know. Then metamorphosized to Soldier Slim.
When you're digging into the history of America's most infamous housing developments, you're bound to stumble upon the Magnolia projects in New Orleans, a place with a reputation that still looms large. Officially known as the C.J. Pete Housing Development, the Magnolia opened its doors to the public way back in 1941. At one point, it was one of the biggest housing projects in the city, housing over 2,100 people across more than 1,400 units. But the Magnolia wasn't just another set of projects. It became a cultural landmark with deep roots tied to some of New Orleans' most influential figures in hip-hop, including the likes of Soulja Slim, Mr. Marcello, Magnolia Shorty, Juvenile, and Jay Electronica.
Flip that W over, make it an M. We in that Magnolia, put it down, third one. You heard? I got him right here. Originally, you know him. There's Magnolia Slim. You know. Then metamorphosized to Soldier Slim.
It's all on my people that's surrounding you right now in this store. By me being in a Magnolia, I call my style off the post flow. So I took the everyday slang,
So just cash money being cash money, neighborhood superstars and stunting. So right now we about to bring y'all to my Water Be Jesus video. Bling, bling, baby.
But beyond the fame of its hip-hop legends, the Magnolia projects had a dark side, a really dark side. It wasn't just known for its music, it was also infamous for having one of the highest murder rates of any housing project in the US. Drugs, violence, and all kinds of criminal activities were a daily reality in the Magnolia.
2 weeks ago, man, 2 of my friends got killed, you know what I'm saying, the same spot. Like that Tuesday, my partner, he got shot 6 times. And turn around that Sunday, my girl, she got shot 6 times. 2 times in the body, 2 times in the head, in the same exact spot.
And as Janet Reno talked about crime in our country, more strikes the streets of New Orleans. This time, it was a robbery that ended in murder.
It was a rough place where survival wasn't guaranteed and life could be cut short in an instant. This is the chaotic environment where Terrence Gangsta Williams found himself growing up.
born and raised in Gertown, Pine and Olive. It's the 17th Ward. Not too far from where Lil Wayne always rap about Holly Grove.
Now, if that name rings a bell, it's probably because Terrence isn't just anyone. He's one of the Williams brothers, alongside Brian Birdman Williams and Ronald Slim Williams, who went on to co-found Cash Money Records.
We have Terrence Gangster Williams, the half-brother of Birdman. Birdman and you have the same father, right?
Right.
But unlike his brothers who made a name for themselves in the music industry, Terrence was on a completely different path. He earned a reputation as one of the most notorious figures to ever come out of the Magnolia projects. Stories suggest he might have been responsible for up to 40 murders, making him one of the most feared men in New Orleans.
In the state, you confessed to killing how many people?
40.
What? You confessed to killing 40 people in the state?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There were even rumors that his own brothers, Birdman and Slim, may have used him as their personal hitman, taking care of their dirty work on the streets.
So he hands you a 38 and says someone owes him some money, and go handle that?
Yeah, come on. Brought me around the corner, pointed him out, shoot him.
So how did Terrence Gangsta Williams manage to navigate the treacherous life in the Magnolia projects without ending up as just another statistic? Let's dive in deeper.
You can hide history, but you can't erase it. I'm a part of New Orleans history. I'm so New Orleans. That's a fact.
Let's take a trip back to New Orleans' 17th Ward, a part of the city that was historically known for its middle-class vibe. This is where Terrence Williams' story begins, where he was born and spent his early years. Life in the 17th Ward back then wasn't too shabby, pretty solid for a kid. But his family life was a whole different story, far from the picture-perfect childhood. Terrence was one of 24 siblings, which is just wild to think about. Imagine growing up with 23 brothers and sisters. With that many kids under one roof, there was basically no way to get any real nurturing or attention. His dad wasn't around much either, which only made things tougher. So like any kid left to his own devices, Terrence spent a lot of time wandering around the neighborhood, sometimes getting into a bit of trouble as kids do.
My mother going to work, she worked at the Sheraton Hotel. So I don't have a father here every day, so I can just rip and run and do what I want. Actually, that's when I first learned how to steal out of A&P store.
But despite his chaotic family situation and his little mischievous streak, Terrence's early years in the 17th Ward were actually pretty good. The neighbors looked out for him and the area wasn't plagued by violence. He was just another middle-class kid in New Orleans having a relatively normal childhood. However, things were changing fast in New Orleans, especially from the time Terrence was born in 1974 through the early 80s. The city was going through some major shifts. By 1980, nearly all the big oil companies that were once a huge part of Louisiana's economy had packed up and moved to Houston, Texas. Why? Because the local politicians were corrupt and anti-business, making it a much better deal for these companies to set up shop elsewhere. With these companies leaving, thousands of jobs disappeared almost overnight. New Orleans suddenly lost its biggest industry and along with it around 20% of its population. As jobs dried up and people left, the city's economy took a nosedive. Many families, especially those in the low to middle income brackets, couldn't afford their homes anymore and faced foreclosure. Banks were snatching up properties left and right, and families that had been self-sufficient found themselves suddenly dependent on government assistance just to get by. Terrence's family was no different. With all those kids to feed and house, they were hit hard by these changes. At just 7 years old, Terrence found himself moving from his comfortable middle-class neighborhood in Gerttown to the infamous Calliope Projects. Now, the Calliope Projects were a whole different world. Initially, Terrence was just fascinated by the hustle and bustle of life in the projects. It seemed like an exciting place to be at first, a stark contrast to his old quiet neighborhood. But reality hit him soon enough.
Calliope Project that's when I witnessed selling, murder.
The Calliope wasn't just a playground, it was a war zone. Little Terrence had to grow up fast in this new environment, and it wasn't long before he experienced something no kid should ever have to go through: seeing his friend get K-worded right in front of him.
I remember one day, man, the police was out there, and he was stretched out in the courtyard like he had got killed back in the driveway. So to see stuff like that, you like, man, this stuff real back here, and I was young.
This kind of trauma leaves a deep scar, especially on a young developing mind. Without proper counseling or any kind of support system, the pain and fear of such a horrific event can fester and grow into something far worse. Unfortunately, resources in the projects were pretty much non-existent, and with so many siblings in his household, Terrence didn't have the opportunity to talk to anyone or work through what he had seen. Instead, he bottled it all up inside. The violence around him and the trauma he experienced forced him to mature way faster than any kid should have to. And let's not forget how dangerous New Orleans was becoming at that time. In that year alone, there were 233 homicides, making it one of the most violent cities in America. Just to give you some perspective, that's like New York City having over 4,000 murders in a year when they usually average about 350. It's hard to even wrap your head around how chaotic and deadly New Orleans was back then, especially in those various housing projects where most of this violence was concentrated. Seeing how bad things were getting, Terrence's family decided it was time for another move. They packed up and left the Calliope Projects for a house on Phillips Street. This area was somewhat similar to Gerttown, still middle class, but definitely a step up from the rough environment of the projects. While it wasn't perfect and still had its own dangers, it was a much better place for Terrence to grow up. But even in this relatively better environment, violence was not completely out of his life. In fact, it showed up again, but in a pretty unexpected way. Picture this. It's 1986, Terrence is just 11 years old, flunking out of school with no real direction or aspirations. He's getting known as the class clown, and without a strong male role model to guide him, he's just drifting. But there's one person he looked up to, almost like a mythical figure in his mind, his older brother, Brian "Baby" Williams. Even though he hardly had any memories of Baby from their childhood, because his brother was just one of his 23 siblings who was always moving from house to house, Baby's reputation was well known. Terrence idolized him from afar, hearing stories about his exploits and his larger-than-life persona. At just 16 years old, Baby was already a young street millionaire. He had everything: the flashy cars, the shiny jewelry, the attention from all the women, and the respect of the entire uptown community. And because of all this, young Terrence couldn't wait to meet his older brother and make a good impression on him, just like any little kid would want to do. Finally, that chance came, but it wasn't at all what Terrence expected. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn.
My mother's phone rang. Phone rang in the kitchen. I answer it. It's baby on the other end. I'm gonna be around there. Come outside when you hear the horn, all right?
11-year-old Terrence was over the moon when he heard his older brother was coming by. For over an hour, he sat by the window, eagerly waiting for the sound of a honking horn. Then finally he saw it, a brand new SUV, music blasting, cruising down the street. Terrence couldn't contain his excitement. He jumped up and sprinted outside to the car. There behind the wheel was his brother Baby. There was no one in the passenger seat and a bunch of girls were packed into the back. Big Bro told Terrence to hop in the car, and for Terrence, this felt like a dream come true. So he quickly jumped in the passenger seat, grinning ear to ear. But that's when things took a strange turn. Out of nowhere, Baby pulled a gun and put it to the back of Terrence's head.
We go for a ride. I'm excited. But no, when I first got in the car, a gun go to the back of my head, and I'm like, what the? I'm shocked because I'm happy to see Big Bro, nice car, but gun, I'm like, what?
Terrence was confused and didn't know what to think, but then Baby explained it was all a lesson. According to Terrence, his brother was teaching him to always be aware and stay on his toes.
See, that's the first rule. Don't never get in that front seat, let nobody sit behind you. Unless you know who this person is, you really trust the person. You just jumping here, you're not paying attention. So I was being groomed.
It was a puzzling and unsettling experience. Sure, you could argue that Baby was teaching him some kind of survival tactic, but why would an 11-year-old boy need to learn something like that? Was Baby preparing him for the harsh realities of life in New Orleans? Or was this a preview of the street life Terrence was being groomed for? It didn't take long to get an answer. The next time Baby came around, he asked Terrence to hop in the car again, but this time he handed him a gun. Terrence, holding a piece for the first time, was ready to do whatever he needed to impress his older brother. They drove around for a bit until Baby pointed out a young man and told Terrence to shoot. Without hesitation, Terrence jumped out of the car and, in a tragic turn of events, K-worded the young man.
Yeah, come on. Brought me around the corner, pointed him out, shoot him.
Okay.
I get out the car, walk up, shot him to the head, the chest, and in the back.
Instead of running back to the car, though, Terrence bolted off in another direction.
And I ran, instead of me jumping back in the car, I ran back home.
Okay. Did he survive?
No.
He had just committed a serious crime, but all he could think about was whether or not he had made his brother proud.
I did it, and I hope I made him happy. I'm hoping Big Bro is happy that I pulled off this crime, got away, and most importantly, I didn't run my mouth.
A few weeks after this shocking incident, another one of Terrence's older brothers came by the house. This time, it was Ronald Slim Williams, the eldest brother and the richest of them all. Unlike Baby, Slim wasn't known for his looks, but he was the brains behind the family's street and financial dealings. Terrence recalls that Slim wasn't necessarily a bad guy, but he was definitely all about his money. So Slim shows up with a white guy in the car and has Terrence sign some papers. At the time, Terrence didn't think much of it. He just thought his brothers were showing him some attention. It was not until years later that he realized he had signed his own life insurance papers. Back then, Terrence had no idea what was really happening. He was just a kid trying to please his older brothers, thinking that doing what they asked would make them happy. But sadly, he didn't realize until much later that his family was not showing him love, they were exploiting him. And from here, things only got worse. At the age of 12, Terrence's home life took another turn for the worse. His mother started dating a new boyfriend who had the potential to be a father figure to young Terrence. But this guy turned out to be far from a role model. In fact, he was probably the worst influence Terrence could have had at that point. Let me explain. This new stepfather wasn't a gangster or a criminal. He was actually a well-known musician. At first glance, you'd think this guy would be a positive influence. He seemed like a decent man on the surface, but that was only because one man knew about his darker side. This man had his own set of struggles and addictions, and instead of getting help, he started using Terrence to get his fix.
He would give me money to go around second and dine near this hood I started hanging around anyway, to go buy for him. And once again, I'm like, okay, this is something cool.
Just like with his older brothers, Terrence found himself being used by another authority figure in his life. The people who should have been protecting him and guiding him were failing him over and over again. But Terrence didn't see it that way at that time. All he saw were people he wanted to make happy, people he wanted to love and be loved by. And so, with a messed up home life and a lack of positive guidance, Terrence found himself drifting deeper and deeper into the streets. After running daily errands for his stepfather, Terrence naturally started to build relationships with the hustlers in the neighborhood. Up to this point, point, his street life mostly involved doing favors for older people. He had never really hung out with or done things with people his own age, but that all changed when he turned 13. So here's how it went down. While at school, Terrence met a girl named Chantel. The two of them hit it off right away and formed a close relationship. Chantel happened to live in the notorious Magnolia projects, and this is how Terrence first started hanging around there. The Magnolia became like a second home to him. In the meantime, Chantel got herself a new boyfriend, a guy named Mosquito, who she also brought around the Magnolia. At first, Terrence wasn't a big fan of Mosquito. There was something about him that rubbed Terrence the wrong way. But after a while, they realized they lived close to each other and they started hanging out more. Pretty soon, Terrence and Mosquito became inseparable. They discovered they had a lot in common, especially when it came to getting in trouble. The two of them were down for pretty much anything, no matter how wild or dangerous.
Always want to do something, like, always quick to want to rob something, want to jack or kill. Like he could be chilling. I'd be like, Mosquito, let's go. Like, it was never one of those. He was never one of the ones that'd be like, no, hold up, no, I don't think. It was always on go, let's do it.
They were both running the streets like they owned them, way too violent for their age. Terrence got his second kill when he saw someone trying to rob Mosquito. Without a second thought, he pulled out a gun and shot the robber. Fast forward to 1989, Terrence is now 15 years old, and by this point, he's deep in the streets. He's robbing drug dealers, stealing cars, and skipping school almost every day. But what really set him apart was his willingness to take on hit jobs for his older brothers. By now, Birdman and Slim were street legends, multimillionaires with a clear mission: to control the entire drug market in New Orleans. And as you can probably guess, achieving this kind of dominance meant they had to eliminate a lot of rivals. So as crazy as it sounds, Terrence would get a call with a target description and be more than ready to take them out, no questions asked. He was fully committed to his brothers and their business, and he was ruthless about it. And he wasn't the only one. Mosquito, driven by loyalty and a desire to prove himself, was just as willing to do hits. The two of them became a dangerous duo, and despite being just 15 years old, Terrence, who was now known by Gangsta, had already claimed 6 lives, 4 of those with Mosquito by his side.
By age 15, you had killed 6 people. 4 of them were with Mosquito.
My best friend.
Their killing spree started in January of '89 and continued into 1990. As unbelievable as it sounds, neither of them had been arrested for anything. Back then, New Orleans was a wild place where you could pretty much get away with anything as long as there wasn't a witness. And in Louisiana, being a witness was basically a death sentence. Even today, if you're set to testify against someone, chances are you won't make it to the courthouse. Gangsta and Mosquito knew this all too well. They were confident that the only way they'd ever see the inside of a jail cell was if they did something incredibly reckless. As time went on, another guy named George Cookie joined Terrence and Mosquito, and the trio continued their criminal exploits. With Cookie in the mix, their crimes escalated. They started pulling off even more daring jobs, pushing the limits further and further. Terrence and his crew had a few run-ins with the law, but somehow Terrence always managed to slip through the cracks with his friends, ending up behind bars. But prison didn't really change much for them. Once they got out, they went straight back to the Magnolia projects and picked up right where they left off, getting back into the same old street life they knew so well. Things took a turn though when Terrence and his friends decided to shoot a man. They hit him 14 times, but against all odds, the guy survived. Back then, in New Orleans, this kind of thing happened all the time, and most of these cases never got solved. There might have been a crowd of witnesses, but nobody dared to say a word against a group as feared as Terrence and his boys. So as usual, Gangsta, George, and Norris figured they had nothing to worry about and went on with their lives without a second thought. But they had no idea that the man they shot was so enraged by the attack that he decided to break the code of silence. He went straight to the police and spilled everything that had happened. That one decision turned everything upside down for Terrence and his friends. Next thing they knew, all 3 of them were arrested for attempted murder.
So I had hit him up around the club like 10 times, then Norris George went up and hit him 4 more times, but he survived. So he's coming to court on us now.
While Terrence was in jail fighting the charges, he ended up making friends with a couple of guys who would change the course of his life. The first was a guy named Dooney, a well-known enforcer from the 17th Ward, someone who had a serious reputation on the streets. The second was Sterling, the very same guy Terrence had a standoff with a few years back. Despite their rocky start, the two of them became tight while locked up and decided to team up once they got out. They made a pact to run the streets together, aiming to become rich, feared, and celebrated in New Orleans. Once they were released, Terrence, Dooney, Looney and Sterling wasted no time getting back to business. They were already known as dangerous figures, but now they wanted to level up and make some serious money. They started moving large amounts of drugs in the streets, trying to establish themselves as big players. But unlike Birdman and Slim, they didn't have a knack for business. Every time they made a profit, they'd blow it all on flashy stuff: cars, clothes, parties, you name it. It was a reckless cycle. They'd sell a bunch of drugs, make a ton of money, and then spend it all just as quickly. Whenever they realized they were broke, they'd come up with a new plan to rob a supplier and start the whole process over again. It was like they were trying to compete with real hustlers and kingpins, but without any of the discipline or strategy. Still, within a few months, they were becoming local legends, real New Orleans superstars. They were living fast, and the girls in the projects took notice, giving them a nickname that would stick: the Hot Boys. Terrence loved the name. It symbolized being young, having money, and being both feared and admired by everyone around. They embraced the Hot Boys name, and soon enough they were calling themselves the Hot Boys of the Magnolia. They were living the high life, but their wild antics couldn't last forever. Eventually, all their misdeeds caught up with them. Terrence lost all of his close friends one by one, either to violence or prison.
I was with Sterling when he got killed. Mosquito had just left me when he got killed. I just got the phone with Dude when he got killed. I was connected to all three of them at some type of way, you know, and that gave me like a, you live by the gun, you die by the gun.
He wasn't immune either. The FBI had been keeping a close eye on him, and they finally caught him in a major bust. Using wiretaps, the feds caught Terrence plotting to take out a group of New York drug dealers in New Orleans over a heroin deal that had gone wrong. The feds intercepted the package and listened in as Terrence laid out his murder plan. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Terrence had no choice but to plead guilty to engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise and solicitation for murder. The judge threw the book at him, sentencing him to life plus 20 years in federal prison. It seemed like the end of the road for Terrence, but in a surprising twist, Terrence was unexpectedly released on January 3, 2022 after U.S. District Judge Ivan Lamel reduced his sentence to 27.5 years. The Federal Bureau of Prisons records showed that Terrence walked out of prison at the age of 47. Now that he's out, Gangsta has turned over a new leaf. He's put his old life behind him and wants nothing to do with the streets of New Orleans. He's focused on living positively, making up for lost time, and staying away from the life that once consumed him.